Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, men will literally go to the moon before they go to therapy. This is First Man. Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like First Man, which we'll be talking about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
I'm not doing good, and I don't know if it's because I don't have my diet dialed in exactly right, or if it's because there's kind of a world war going on. Hard to say. I'm going to try to tweak some supplements and also monitor the situation, because what else can you do?
I'm trying specifically to not monitor the situation. That is my new goal.
You're doing a twist on it. That's bold.
It's one of those things where at a certain point, and I'm going to credit my wife with steering me in this direction after we had a talk the other night, but like when you can't really do anything about it, absorbing all this bad news eventually is just ushering yourself to your own mental health doom.
Yes.
And it's not productive. And I bought some books that have nothing to do with America's current political situation, and I'm reading those, and I'm playing games again instead of doom scrolling.
Nice.
Trying to stay busy in other ways. And tomorrow morning, I'm leaving for the bachelor party of one of our dear mutual friends in Vermont. So if you hear any chaotic news coming out of the Burlington area, it was probably me.
Nice. Well, I hope you get into only the best kinds of chaos, but that sounds like a great thing to do in real life with real people that you care about. That is probably the antidote to endless doom scrolling.
I hope so. I hope a few days away will detox me. And then when I come back, I won't have the urge to look at it all right away.
It's very noble.
Is it? I don't know. It's just what I hope works for me.
Just surviving.
Yeah, it's just what we have to do. Speaking of what we have to do, what we have to do for this podcast is watch movies. Did you happen to watch any that you wanted to share with the listeners? How was that? Was that okay?
That was great. And I not only had to, but I got to watch a cool movie called The Secret Agent.
Oh, yeah.
People may have heard of this critically acclaimed 2025 Brazilian film that was nominated for Best Picture. Stars John's guy, Wagner Moura, who was also nominated. He was nominated in Best Actor. I watched it as part of my Oscar season where I was attempting to take in some of the nominees. I'm really glad I caught this one. I got to go into it not knowing what it was about. And this turns out is a movie that thrives on the way it slowly, deliberately unfolds its story. So I'm going to try not to reveal too much. But what I can say is this is a really special movie. It's so rich in detail, its characters, the setting. Right away, you just meet the most interesting characters. You soak up all this Brazilian history and culture. And then because all of that stuff is very captivating, you don't notice that the movie is kind of unconventional in the storytelling. I feel like it took half the movie to even learn what the main character's deal was and the situation that he's facing. And then just as that plot stuff starts to coalesce and pick up steam, the movie kind of throws you for some more loops. It takes some off-kilter turns, doesn't necessarily resolve things in conventional ways that you might expect a movie to go. And all that adds up, for me at least, to a really unique, really enjoyable film. And I highly recommend The Secret Agent.
Yeah, we watched it pretty close to each other. I think we both were expecting something else. I was expecting more of a standard kind of clandestine romp.
Yeah.
Tuxedos and gadgets, and you hear The Secret Agent and your brain forms a certain kind of expectation. But you were correct in stating that Wagner Moura is very much one of my guys. Just absolutely that dude. So great in this. And I had recently watched the first film from this director, which is called Bacurau.
Okay.
Which I also really enjoyed. Not his first film, but his first film to get any traction in America. He had a couple before that. And that kind of gave me a little bit of an inkling that it wasn't going to be such a standard action espionage thriller type of movie. But even I wasn't prepared for how kind of weird and janky and just unconventional this movie can be, but in the best way. And it all loops back around to something very relatable about family and about generational trauma.
It's got so many different ways of entertaining you. It is a bit of a thriller. It's an emotional drama. At times, it's a very funny movie about quirky characters in and around each other. It gets weird at times.
Yeah.
It's a little harrowing at times. It's really cool. I'm like, that's when filmmaking kind of transcends to something very artful. It delights, it surprises. surprises, it entertains and moves you. It's really just a cool movie.
Yeah, I also highly recommend it, but I got to talk about my movie of the week.
Oh, yeah, please.
Now, we already talked about Wagner Moura, one of my guys, but I watched a movie featuring one of my gals, one of my top favorite ladies in Hollywood, Miss Rachel McAdams.
Oh.
She was in a movie from Master of Horror himself, Sam Raimi, called Send Help. This is a 2026 release, so very new. It's probably not eligible for this podcast. It had a $40 million budget. It made just over $90 million, so more than doubled its budget. It probably would be a stretch to consider it a flop of any kind, which is really good news because it's a R-rated, non-franchise, non-IP story. Is Rachel McAdams a great actor that a lot of people admire and enjoy? Yes. Is she a box office titan? Probably not. So to see this movie get the kind of warm reception it did, it also got great reviews, was really encouraging. And it's Sam Raimi back on his bullshit, just being super gross and mean-spirited.
Okay.
In a fun way, but it sends you for a little bit of a loop too. It kind of flips what you expect. There's a bit of a revenge fantasy element to the movie too. It's billed as horror. You'll never be scared, not even for a second, but you will be extremely entertained.
Okay.
And if you don't deal well with gore, you might have a hard time watching it because it can get pretty gross, but again, in kind of a funny way. It's that Sam Raimi kind of signature style where it's so over the top that it's hard to take it seriously and get actually scared and upset by it. But yeah, if you're a fan of just pulpy genre, or the show Survivor also plays a big role in the movie, then I would check it out because I had a great time with it. I don't know, were you planning on giving it a look?
I think so. This seems like the kind of horror that has the kind of spirit I can get into. It's not there to punish me. It's there to entertain, and I think I can get on board with that.
I swear to God, Ian, if you don't watch The Bone Temple soon, I'm going to lose it.
I started The Bone Temple.
You did?
But it was scary.
It starts pretty tough. Yeah, that first sequence is not the easiest to get through.
It's a tough sequence. And then just being out in the forest with those infected is just so tense for me that I can only consume it in small quantities.
Unfortunately for Danny Boyle and Cillian Murphy, the movie did not make any money. But fortunately for me, that means I can force you to watch it like a couple times. So I'm going to do that eventually, just in case you were wondering.
Eventually, I'll get desensitized to it.
Speaking of no, I got nothing. We're talking about First Man. Ian, tell me about your journey with First Man, which is, of course, a biopic about Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon, focusing only in the events leading up to and including the first walk on the moon. Did you see this movie before we were getting ready to cover it for the podcast? Do you remember anything about the marketing? What were your basic impressions of it?
I remember hearing about it, and I don't think I ever got interested in it. I'm not sure where it falls in my timeline of Gosling awareness, because initially, when I hadn't been hip to what he could do, I was like, oh, that's a serious actor for people who like romance movies and stuff. I'm like, oh, that's not going to be my guy.
Fucking dare you.
And then I learned, I certainly came around on him, but I'm not sure where I was at this point. I feel like for better or worse, this movie is what I thought it was going to be, which is sort of a hazy period piece, taking a look back at the space race era, glorifying guys in jumpsuits and other guys in white shirts and skinny black ties. Back in 2018, I think we were all a bit jaded about self-serious biopics, which I think is a legitimate stance to have. And another thing to think about and like how this movie hits you is my viewpoint has changed on whether the U.S. as a country, as a government apparatus ever did or will ever again do something that's cool or noble or inspiring to the world. So I feel like we've come such a long way from movies like The Right Stuff, which was the most similar movie to this from my youth, and then Apollo 13, much later, which was still greeted with a kind of patriotic pride in the USA. And so it's just, I don't know, it's just funny to imagine this movie coming out in 2018 and how people thought about the U.S. at the time.
I think by the time this movie came out, we were in the first Trump presidency where there was much less of an emphasis on pioneerism and being the first to do something cool, unless it made you a lot of money. We've kind of abandoned these projects that are, like you said, more about the human spirit and discovery than making money, because we're in the end game of capitalism where nobody can afford to do anything that doesn't turn an immediate profit, which is why America's infrastructure is crumbling and we're all fucked.
Yeah.
So this movie to me was reaching backwards for that time period in a nostalgic way when we cared about things besides just putting a little something extra in our pocket. But it's a strange movie for me in terms of Damien Chazelle's filmography, because I talked to you a little bit about this off mic, but when you watch his movies, they're not all hits. He's had an up and down career, to be sure, but they're all just so extremely alive and dynamic and vibrant, whether it's in a good way, like in La La Land, young people falling in love and the love for Hollywood and the love for music and dance, or Whiplash, where like obsession and anger and violence, and then Babylon, which was just debauchery and vice, but they all were dealing with these big emotional swings. And then The First Man is just so muted for 99% of its run, that I was like, what about this movie attracted Damien Chazelle? And I think you touched on this. You were able to watch some behind the scenes featurettes, that it was more of like a technical challenge for him than anything.
Yeah, it was really interesting to hear because I don't know a lot about him, and I have neutral to mixed feelings about his work as a filmmaker.
You motherfucker. You're conspiring against me.
We disagree on the merits of Whiplash specifically, but I don't think it's a bad movie. I think he's a good filmmaker. But yeah, I looked at the same thing. I'm like, the signature movies are about the arts. They're about entertainment. They're about music. They're about creative people engaged in creative pursuits, very high energy. And then you hear him talk about this movie and he's like, I just wanted to perfectly recreate what it was like in 1965 to be training for a space mission with the technical exactness of every button on every console. And it's like, he just took himself somewhere else, that he still found a way to play to his strengths. The emotional story of this movie, to his credit, is more what the movie's about, right? Like, it's set against the backdrop of a very nice recreation of the space stuff. But it stands out. It's like, oh, why'd he pick this? Especially when he seemed to be thriving in his wheelhouse.
Yeah. And my first instinct was like, maybe this was make this movie for us so you can make Babylon your big, expensive, blank check movie. But different studios involved. It was a big gap in between the two. Like, it doesn't really feel that way. We may never know the specific inner workings, but it's also one of the only movies he directed that he didn't write. Okay. Actually, it's the only movie he's directed that he didn't write. He's written other movies that he didn't direct, but never the other way around. So it does feel like an outlier in his filmography in a big way. But it's going to be fun to try to deconstruct how much of his sensibilities he brings to such a kind of muted story.
I think for all that being said, he made a pretty good movie. It's not my favorite, but it's a high quality film. But I think at the same time, maybe he did learn a lesson. Let me just stick closer to my passion projects.
I don't know if he learned much because Babylon was a massive bomb compared to even this one. But he's got stuff in the works. We'll talk about it.
I suspect he feels better about bombing with Babylon than bombing with this.
Babylon has way more defenders. Not that First Man needs defenders, because like I said, it was a very middle of the road movie. Critics liked it, didn't love it. Audiences liked it, didn't love it. Babylon, I feel like, was a much more divisive film.
It gets in your face more.
But I agree. I do like this movie. I watched it for the first time on a plane, which I mentioned at the end of the last episode, which is probably not a great idea because a lot of people, like, you know how they say they edit certain movies that feature plane crashes when you're watching them on a plane, so it's not as terrifying. Like, they didn't do shit to this movie. I watched the full fucking cut. Maybe they thought it was a big enough difference because spaceships back then were basically just like super planes. A lot of people fucking die in planes in this movie.
Or nearly do, or like you have to sit with the guy wondering if he's about to crash and die in his plane in the first minute of the movie.
So the first minute of the movie is a near plane crash, nearly killing our main character. And then when I watched it, I was the father of a new daughter. And then this movie takes a super hard turn into just absolutely soul-crushing misery because his baby daughter is dying of cancer.
Yeah.
Not baby, she's toddler aged. That makes it worse somehow because you just see her struggling with it. It's just super painful first like 20 minutes of this movie.
Yeah.
It really gets you. Like, I've been avoiding Hamnet and now my stupid ass just, let's put First Man on the schedule. That'll be better. No, it's not. It's just as bad, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Should we get into a little bit of the production of this movie?
You hinted at a bunch of it, but let's hear how this thing happened.
All right. By 2018, Damien Chazelle was on top of the world. His 2014 directorial effort Whiplash was a critical and commercial hit, announcing him as one of the leading auteurs of Hollywood's next generation. What's more, he wasn't even 30 yet. He took this momentum and used it to resurrect a long-dead project, an adaptation of James R. Hansen's 2005 Neil Armstrong biography, First Man.
Babe, look, that's the First Man.
Originally announced as a film in 2003, 2 years before the book was even published, Clint Eastwood was originally attached to direct with Warner Brothers as the distributor. The film failed to make it to production, however, with the rights ultimately ending up with DreamWorks and Universal Pictures. Chazelle was announced as the director in 2015, with Josh Singer writing a revised version of the script and Ryan Gosling starring. But Chazelle had one more stop to make before entering production on First Man. La La Land was released on December 9th, 2016, and was an immediate sensation. Making over $500 million on a $30 million budget, the movie would go on to earn a record-setting 14 Oscar nominations. It would nab some high-profile awards at the ceremony, including Best Director for Chazelle, which was even more noteworthy as he was the youngest ever winner, and Best Actress for Emma Stone. It even briefly won Best Picture, but alas.
We lost, by the way. There's a mistake.
Chazelle's star had risen to new heights, and expectations for First Man could not have been higher. With a $70 million budget secured, Chazelle rounded out the cast with a murderer's row of handsome white character actors, with Jason Clarke, Kyle Chandler, Corey Stoll, John Bernthal, and Shea Wiggum signing on. Bernthal was forced to drop out of the role of Dave Scott for personal reasons, and Christopher Abbott was brought on to replace him. The co-lead of Janet Armstrong went to Claire Foy, Day, and filming began in Atlanta, Georgia during November of 2017. Wanting his actors to really feel like they were in space in these contraptions, Chazelle foregoed any use of green screen in the movie, instead using 30-foot LED screens to project the environments that he could not recreate practically.
Can we go to the moon? No, Damien, it's not practical.
With filming completed, the movie was set to be released on October 12, 2018, though it faced some stiff competition at the box office. First Man would debut in third place,
The title was a lie.
earning $16 million in its opening weekend despite strong reviews. The first and second spots were taken by Venom and A Star is Born, respectively, both in their second week of release. Other notable new releases were Goosebumps 2, Haunted Halloween, and our favorite, Bad Times at the El Royale. The next week, First Man dropped 48% as Halloween debuted in the top spot with a whopping $76 million. But Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga's remake of A Star is Born was picking up steam and likely secured the serious drama for grown-ups audience that First Man desperately needed.
They're far from the shallow now.
First Man would go on to make just $49 million domestically and $105 million worldwide, incurring a likely loss of between $30 and $40 million for Universal Pictures. It was Chazelle's first taste of box office disappointment, but wouldn't be his last, cough Babylon, cough cough. The movie isn't discussed much these days, and Gosling is on a personal mission to redeem himself when it comes to space travel, as he's currently starring in hit movie Project Hail Mary and will star in Star Wars Starfighter in 2027.
Yeah, Gosling's doing pretty good by himself these days.
Motherfucker loves a adjective noun. He's the first man. He's the gray man.
That's
He's
right.
the fall guy. He's one of the nice guys, you know?
It's true.
He's a guy's guy and a man's man.
I wish they'd called Driver. That would have been better. He's just Ken. He's just Ken. Interestingly enough, took a big break after this movie. He did not star in another movie after this until 2022's The Gray Man, which sucked. So a big layover after this movie. I wonder what it was. I mean, I'm sure some of it had to do with his growing family, but he kind of came back with a vengeance.
I think you get quarantined after you do a space movie. You have to be kept in isolation for several years. Make sure none of that.
We're not going to see him again for a long time because he's got two back to back. But yeah, we're recording this just after the receipts for the weekend box office came in. Project Hail Mary made upwards of $80 million in its opening weekend, which is great for a non-IP, non-franchise, original sci-fi movie. Lord and Miller, man, they don't miss.
I just been hearing nothing but good things about that one, so I'm excited. Even though, I'm very dubious about the author. Andy Weir tried one of his books, didn't like it.
Yeah, we just talked about him not long ago.
People are like, this thing is so amazing. They can't stop gushing about this movie. It's got really good word of mouth, so I've got to check it out.
Even if the source material is not up to par, I trust Lord and Miller and Gosling pretty implicitly, so
yes.
I will certainly give it a look. Hoping to make it to the theater in the next week or two, but something tells me this one has legs, so I don't have to rush quite as much.
It sounds like it might stay in theaters for a while.
Also written by another one of our boys, Drew Goddard.
Oh yeah, that combination of people is pretty powerful. I'm glad to hear that they produced something that seems to really be working.
Writer-director of two previous episodes, but two movies we both loved, Cabin in the Woods and Bad Times at the El Royale.
Good stuff.
I'll be on board for pretty much anything Drew Goddard does at this point. But First Man, do you think A Star is Born was kind of a surprise hit and maybe took some wind out of its sails? Or what do you attribute this movie underperforming to, if you had to guess?
I always feel like I am undereducated on release schedules and, what time of the year things are supposed to do well. It's really interesting when you get into October, which I know is early for Oscar bait season.
Maybe a month too early to really be.
And obviously there's the horror movies are all trying to get out in October, which was not necessarily like a direct competition for this movie, but a direct competition for what people are in the mood for going to the theater to see. But then you hear A Star is Born dropped at the same time, and you're like, that is serious drama that does directly compete with the audience for this. And I'm like, what's going on in October? And why wasn't this held for a more prestigious release? Or what could they have done differently?
I'm not sure what the expectations were for A Star is Born. I wonder if they saw it on the schedule and thought maybe it won't be such a big deal, and then ended up being a surprise hit. It's Bradley Cooper's first directorial effort. Lady Gaga's not an actor, but yeah, that was an absolute sensation. But this was pre-COVID, so you'd think there'd be enough moviegoers to lift both ships, so to speak.
This is a movie, like I was alluding to earlier, it's a little bit anachronistic. It comes too late for the times, where a movie of this quality that's, serious biopic with a heart-wrenching emotional story, it feels like in another era, a movie this well made with all that going for it would just be something you could bank on. Oh, that's definitely going to make good money, even if it's not the hit of the year. But yeah, maybe it's just that people kind of moved on from that.
Yeah, it does confound me because I guess Apollo 13 had Tom Hanks. I'm not sure what the comparison between Tom Hanks in 1995 and Ryan Gosling in 2018 really adds up to. I think Gosling was more of a heartthrob. Hanks was considered more of a comedian, both kind of taking on these serious dour roles. But Apollo 11 is more famous to the general public than Apollo 13 ever was, you know?
Yes.
If you're going to make a movie about a trip to the moon, Apollo 11 is the big one.
It kind of is. It's important that way.
So yeah, I'm confounded by it. I don't really get what was holding audiences back. And I say that as if I was not going to the movies in 2018. Like I absolutely was. I don't know why I didn't go see this. I went and saw Venom like an idiot. So what the fuck was I doing? I just, it wasn't on my radar. And I'd already seen Whiplash and loved it. So I really can't make sense of what happened with this movie.
You know what? It's not just that it's like people are tired of this kind of movie, but it doesn't stand out. And now that you say that, I can picture hearing about this movie and feeling like, oh, wait, wasn't that already done before? Is this an old movie? Doesn't it seem like too familiar? Like, oh, I saw that when it came out a few years ago, so I'm not going to go see it now.
Part of that might, it's a period piece. So those kind of can feel out of time to some extent. But Chazelle went through such painstaking efforts to make the movie look like it was filmed in the time period it takes place in. So it does feel like a real throwback in that sense. And I don't know, you think 2018 people would have been nostalgic for a simpler time in American history. Not that it actually was, but that's like the boomer mindset is the nostalgia, rose-colored glasses, all that. The movie maybe doesn't do enough to kind of extend its vision to how the rest of the American public views what's going on with NASA or what's going on with America in a greater sense. There is one attempt made later in the film, but it's a very insulated story. Like it's just focusing on these guys, their families, and their mission.
Yeah, and they do have some external conflicts. Again, it's like a really well-made movie because it does touch on everything. The hero's got an internal conflict. He's got a one-to-one personal conflict, dealing with his wife, dealing with the people he works with.
Fuck-ass Buzz Aldrin.
Fucking Buzz Aldrin is a real asshole.
Did you know that about Buzz Aldrin before you saw this movie, that he's just like a real dick to everybody and a pain in the ass to talk to?
I guess it didn't soak in that it was something that was like an issue in the program with his colleagues at the time. But I think Buzz Aldrin in later years, when he was still sort of a spokesperson, I remember it becoming publicly known that he was a salty character and kind of weird and would say shit. Didn't that happen in recent years?
Yeah, I knew him as being like a cranky conservative, but that's something you expect to happen to old white guys.
True.
Come to find out, he was a fucking pain in the ass his entire life. So
yeah.
And Corey Stoll is great at playing that kind of smarmy dude that you just want to punch. Like he's got that down.
He's really good at that. But yeah, these guys are facing off. They have their third level of conflict, which is like man versus world. And so there's big societal forces. One of them is the political pressure that like, why are you spending money on the space program? Are we going to fail at this and waste a lot of money? And the other one is the Russians, right? This is all happening in the backdrop of the Cold War. So they drip in a little bit of, the Russians are always beating us and they got the first man in space and we got to get the first spacewalk. It's really important, which it's harder to relate to that stuff now, but I grew up in an era where I could still relate to that. So like all that's in the film. It's very hard to poke holes in this movie and go, oh, here's what's missing or what they fucked up. It's quite well done from start to finish.
Yeah, pretty painstakingly researched and just constructed in a very smart way. But I've always been curious, and I'm sure there's probably better people I could ask than you because neither of us were really alive for the height of the Cold War. But like, what was the big fucking deal about getting to space before Russia? Were they planning like military activities up there on the moon and we just wanted to get there first? We could stop them, or was it just a bragging rights thing?
I think it was some of all that. It was a little bit arbitrary, which is reflected in the famous JFK speech about it. We choose to do these things because they are hard.
It's pretty good JFK. Well, we've been dancing around a little bit. Do you want to start getting into the story of this movie?
Yeah, let's light this rocket and see if it gets off the launch pad.
All right.
Here we go. Neil Armstrong, played by Ryan Gosling, is a man of few words, a talented engineer, and a decent test pilot, flying the X-15 rocket plane into the upper reaches of the atmosphere and beyond. Neil and his wife Janet, played by Claire Foy, have a baby daughter named Karen who is suffering from brain cancer. When Karen dies, Neil is terribly grieved, but he can't express it. Instead, he throws himself into his work, applying for and winning a role as a NASA astronaut in the Gemini space program. The Armstrongs move to Houston, where they have another child, their second boy, and make friends among their new community of astronauts. At work, Neil proves his grit and determination when he toughs out multiple sessions on the grueling multi-axle training device. Gemini's main objective is to figure out how to dock with another spacecraft, which the Apollo moon launch will need to do. Neil is chosen to command Gemini 8, which will be the first mission to attempt the docking maneuver. But in the lead-up to his mission, Neil receives some terrible news. Two of his friends and fellow astronauts, Elliot C. and Charles Bassett, have died in a plane crash while traveling to a training location. This confrontation with mortality hits Neil hard. The already quiet Armstrong begins to withdraw even further into himself as he dwells on the loss of his daughter and the chances that he might not survive his own career to be there for his family.
A lot going on. Let's talk about the intro first. Didn't we just do this with Buckaroo Banzai? Rogue astronaut flying a rocket plane, and the people back at headquarters are like, you better cut it out, man. You're out of control. But everything works out okay?
Yes, thankfully Neil did not fly the X-15 through a mountain.
Would not have worked. Yeah, something tells me.
As Buckaroo did. But yeah, once you said that to me and I rewatched that scene, it's very much the same thing. It's a guy in a helmet, not saying very much, flipping lots of controls and instruments. And there's a rickety vehicle going very fast and he lands on a dry lake bed and she's surrounded by vehicles. It's very Buckaroo Banzai. But I guess you could say that Buckaroo Banzai is very space program.
Well, I don't know how much information they were privy to when they made Buckaroo Banzai, because that movie seems like the fever-driven, insane person in the best way. I'm not sure if they were working with all the historical hindsight, but there's a bit of a subplot that you called out in your monologue by saying he's a decent pilot. Like, nobody seems to really trust him as a pilot. He's more respected as an engineer. And that's a secondary conflict in his early scenes, is like whether or not Neil's going to be grounded, as in not allowed to fly anymore.
Yeah, and that's apparently a real life thing. Famous test pilot Chuck Yeager shows up for one line in this movie where he goes, "You got to ground that guy. He sucks." But that was a real thing. These guys who were test pilots came from different backgrounds, and some of them were like the most talented stick jockeys on the planet, and some of them were eggheads. And Neil Armstrong is definitely in the egghead camp. He's so soft-spoken compared to the sort of swaggering test pilot stereotype.
Preternaturally, like, cool under pressure, though, which I think is a big bonus.
Yes, he always tries to solve problems with his head, and he's very good at that. And it's an interesting story of like his particular set of talents and proclivities end up succeeding. They work out great for him. They work out great for the country that was trying to land a man on the moon. But it also, the movie ends up asking the question of like, what do those same set of quirks mean for this man's personal life and his relationship to his wife and his kids, which are quite challenged through the course of this.
What did you make of the actual X-15 rocket plane in the intro? Was it a shock to you how kind of rickety these aircraft seem to be?
Yeah. As we hinted at, Chazelle was super into portraying that. That was like something that he says in these special features. Like, I really wanted people to feel like how rickety these things are. And throughout it, like, we get to see the rocket plane. Later, we get to see the Gemini rockets and capsules, and then the Apollo stuff. And it's all rickety and everything is creaking and groaning and screaming. And it's creepy. It's great. The way he portrays this stuff, it looks great. It sounds and feels great. It's very effective at giving you that you are there feeling in a rickety space capsule that I would be dying to get out of.
I would not feel safe up there in that thing, but that's why I didn't sign up. That's the only reason I did not sign up to be a rocket scientist.
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly good excuse. I mean, this is visually, it's good. You mentioned like how they set up these recreations of the various vehicles and then they filmed them in front of this giant LED screen that's like an IMAX kind of screen so that they could get the backgrounds in the shot and the actors could actually see the Earth out the window of the spacecraft just as the camera could. And that really works. That helps with the authenticity for lots of reasons. It just looks good on film. It seems really complicated to do. And again, for a guy who's not a special effects director to just pour himself into this and achieve it so well is pretty impressive. But there's a lot of flares. There's a lot of sort of retro grainy look to the film. But I feel like he balanced it just right. There's all this graininess, it's a lot of reflections, but he didn't go full J.J. Abrams and make it like take you out of the movie.
Forget to finish it. Oh, sorry.
That too. But yeah, it's a stylish movie. It's not just a plain Jane documentary retelling of a story.
I think those screens have become more popular over green screen in recent years for budgetary reasons. It shortens your post-production time. It makes it a little cheaper. Chazelle, I think, was using them more for, like you said, the immersion of the actors and really making them feel like they were where he wanted them to be. Let's talk about our boy, Baby Goose. We've covered him before, but mostly for his loud goofball roles, like The Nice Guys and Fall Guy, which we love. But this is more quiet, stoic, less violent badass than like Drive and Place Beyond the Pines. Almost like Unlocking a Third, like nerdy stoic.
Yeah.
Although there are, like, I did think he was going to punch Jason Clarke at one point. So like he has a little bit of aggression in him when he leaves that wake early and Jason Clarke shows up at his house.
It's a really interesting character, and it's not in the mold of Hollywood heroes because it's a really introverted guy. It's a real nerdy guy.
On the moon, nerds get their pants pulled down and they are spanked with moon rocks.
He's stoic and he's emotionally restrained, but not in the cool guy Clint Eastwood way. Like,
No, he's repressed.
yeah, he's repressed. And you, just like his wife eventually does, which we'll get to, you lose patience with him. You're like, just fucking deal with your shit and let's communicate like normal people instead of keeping everything inside.
Yeah, kind of an infuriating person to talk to or be around, I imagine. imagine. And his kids came out and said, this is the most accurate portrayal of our dad that's ever been put on screen. This is what he was like. He was quiet. He was, like we said, repressed, but that doesn't mean he doesn't feel things. He just tries really hard not to show it. And that's the magic of Gosling in this role, is that he betrays just enough of what's going on beneath the surface. He's hurting, but he's working real hard as like a family man of the 50s and 60s would, to not show it.
Absolutely. It's a really good performance. But because, like you said, I'm so in love with the great funny man, Ryan Gosling, and I seeing him cry.
Great crier, too.
But Doctor, he's Pagliacci. Like, I can't be watching him cry. And that's probably why, especially the first time through, when I was just so much in the other Gosling mode, I was like, it just hurt my feelings to watch him in this. And then subsequent watch, I'm like, okay, he's a really good actor. He has certainly established himself doing serious roles, tear-jerking roles, and he really does a nice job with this.
Yeah, he's quietly become one of my favorite actors. I would not have, somebody asked me who my favorite actor was, he wouldn't have jumped to the front of my mind a few years ago, but it's hard to deny now that like when I see him in a movie, I'm like, I don't care what it's about anymore. I'll probably just watch it.
Yeah.
What higher praise can you give an actor, right?
Yeah, he's way up there for me too.
Let's talk about Karen Armstrong. Like we mentioned, she's got brain cancer, and I just found the scenes almost like perverse, just like how they used to treat brain cancer. You just feel like she's being tortured to some degree. I know they're obviously trying to help her. It just looks so arcane. They've got this big, like almost funnel pointed at her brain, and they're just shooting tons of fucking radiation at her head. Yeah,
this radiation room that she's in and her parents are watching is really terrifying and stark. And Chazelle treats all that stuff really well. He communicates that whole sequence. That's a lot of the beginning of the movie. After that initial rickety X-15 part, it goes into this, and the movie moves very quickly in that first 15, 20 minutes. I noticed it's almost all montage. It's not quite what you would call scene if you're comparing scene versus montage, where characters enter a scene, interact with each other, and come out with an outcome. It's like little flashes. I was calling it grainy glimpses in my head as I was noticing it. It's kind of like constant time jumps forward. So it tells this whole story of this child's sickness and death in a sped up way, but it's very effective. It gives you just enough. And Chazelle's very good at just visually, with a couple lines, painting these moments that really hit you.
Yeah. One of the only times that Gosling lets himself open up as an actor is when Karen dies. And it was just heartbreaking when he's like packing. He has all these notebooks full of like theories and ideas about how he can like logic his way out of her dying of brain cancer. And when he's just quietly packing those up, I cried every time. 3 times now. 3 times I watched this movie, I cried during that scene.
That is super powerful. I mean, that's a real human moment. But like you said, it also does incredible character work, because Neil Armstrong is an engineer and he tries to solve his problems in life by diving further into his habits that have made him successful. And so he's documented her care and her plans and his ideas on these little graph paper notebooks, and they're laid out all over his desk. And it never explains that to you, but you pick it up by just glimpsing it a few times, basically over his shoulder. And then when he walks into that room and puts those notebooks away, that finality of closing the book on the efforts that he spent to save his daughter's life, being unsuccessful, really tugs at the heartstrings.
I think most directors or actors would have had him lose it for 1 second there and like maybe throw a notebook in the garbage, but he very deliberately places them in a drawer and just closes it.
It's so fucking sad. Yeah, it's good.
It's just devastating. But the flip side of Neil is Janet Armstrong, played by Claire Foy, who's great. Yeah. And she's so much bigger and more open and emotional than Neil, which kind of explains their relationship. Opposites attract in some ways, and she fills in the parts of his personality that he can't show people. Maybe he's more practical and analytical, and that helps her too. They do make a lot of sense as a couple. It's kind of in the background of this movie about Karen's death does put a real damper on their life together. Like they start growing apart. He starts not ignoring his other kids, but just like keeping them at arm's length a little bit, which you can certainly understand why. But that's like another kind of sad background storyline happening, is the weakening of their bond.
And it's interesting because on reflecting on it on subsequent watches, there's quite a bit of push and pull. You know, when you come to a movie like this and you're like, is this going to be a standard biopic where it's like they have some moments from history that they've got to illustrate, and then they're going to try to gin up a story behind it, an emotional story of a guy overcoming some shit in his personal life in order to do the historical thing that he does. And it's, of course, doing that, but it also transcends it because it's got subtlety in the way it does that. And that moment clearly is the start of something in him breaking, which eventually takes its toll on their relationship. But there are moments in between, like he has up moments. So there's a shape to his emotional arc because after this, they fit into their new community when they move to Houston. They make friends. He loosens up a little bit. They have a romantic dance together. So it's not like a one-way thing. It's more subtle and nuanced, and it feels more real life for that reason.
Yeah, and as much as I'm hinting at they grew apart, like they did end up getting divorced, but in fucking 1994.
Oh, okay.
So in very typical repressed white people in the 60s way, they just kind of soldiered on for another 30 years after most of the happiness had left their relationship.
Until their kids had kids, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you kept saying this word. I did not realize this was a Disney picture. Is Jiminy Cricket in this movie?
He's not, but you would be forgiven for looking around when these astronauts start going, Jiminy, Jiminy, Jiminy. Took me a minute.
They're wishing upon a moon. Hey-o. No, he sings about wishing upon a star.
Yeah. Those of us who grew up, I don't know, in the regular world after the 50s and 60s, even when you heard about the Gemini space program, it was called the Gemini program. And you're like, oh, yeah, it's named after the twins, the sign of the zodiac.
My birth sign.
Yeah. And so I had to look it up. And it turns out that even in the 60s, most Americans also were normal and they said Gemini, but somehow the astronauts didn't. They were into saying
fucking antisocial weirdos.
They were all into saying Gemini. And so at one point, NASA had to come out and make a press statement to say Gemini is the official pronunciation of the Gemini program.
It's like they all had only read that word in a book, and the first person to say it out loud just was the highest ranking, and nobody wanted to correct him.
It's that. It's, uncultured white guy, like taking Latin words, taking words of Romance language origin, and just sort of giving them the old scrub down, saying things like Los Angeles and Gemini.
Speaking of Gemini program, I quite liked the scenes at NASA headquarters where they're training for the flights. It reminded me of like a procedural, but with way overqualified actors, because what a murderer's row of fucking handsome white guys this movie decided to throw at us. We've got, in no particular order, but kind of, Kyle Chandler, my fucking guy.
That's your dude.
As Deke Slayton. Really excited for Lanterns. That trailer has me fully erect. But Kyle Chandler plays like a gruff authoritarian so well that I find it very off-putting when he's playing like a more lighthearted character.
Yeah, it's weird.
I don't feel like I should ever see him smile, but Game Night always threw me off for that reason. He's great in it. We got Jason Clarke, not quite one of my guys, but somebody I never mind seeing in anything. Used to watch him on a show called Brotherhood on Showtime, which I was a big fan of.
Okay.
He's Ed White. Of course, we mentioned Corey Stoll. And then Patrick Fugget. He said Fugget. They cast him as Elliot C. I sent you a picture of him, and I said, they cast Mayor Pete in this movie because he looks eerily like Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg?
I think you had it right the first time.
I probably did. And then, of course, Shea Wiggum. You thought Kyle Chandler was gruff and authoritarian. What is Shea Wiggum's only line in the first act of this movie? Just do your job.
It's a good little Wiggum micro impression. And like you said, Shea Wiggum doesn't have a lot of lines. He plays a guy who's important in space program history, Gus Grissom.
Yeah, high-ranking, very important guy.
Yeah, like he was already a veteran spaceman. He's 10 or 15 years older than Armstrong and the guys that are getting into the programs now. And I think he literally designed the Gemini capsule. So he had moved on from being a pilot as much to really being a big figure in this program. But all these guys are, like you said, they're kind of background material, right? I mean, they have some key moments, whether they become friends of Neil, who he then loses tragically, or adversaries of Neil, who he spars with in trying to move forward in his career. But it's impressive. And like you said, because these names are known, Jim Lovell, Buzz Aldrin, all these sort of historical names.
It's a cool name.
It's cool that they're populated like that. The wallpaper in these scenes is such good quality wallpaper. It's like great actors and really good faces. Like we commented on, these guys look like 50s dudes in some kind of way. You give a guy like a buzz cut and just put him in a white shirt and a skinny black tie, and you're like, that's a 50s dude.
Yeah, I wonder about Bernthal. Does he have 50s face like some of these other guys do? Would he have worked? Because
that's a good question.
There's a physiology to it that I can't quite put my finger on, but it's there, and everyone probably knows it without being able to identify it. There's just a 50s guy look.
Yeah, some guys that I didn't know were 50s guys, like Lucas Haas shows up in this movie, and I didn't think of him as that, but boy, his face really works.
First private of the Pussy Patrol.
Gosh.
Ethan Embry, too. Another old favorite of mine from my childhood. Okay. He's got a very small role in this movie. He was also on Brotherhood with Jason Clarke. But yeah,
cool.
Shea Wiggum, he's very believable as this kind of gruff astronaut authority figure, slightly older. Also very believable as just a down on his luck Kentucky man who has a chance meeting with an outlaw by the name of Boyd Crowder in the final season of Justified. And that's our Justified crossover of the week.
Justified crossover of the week.
Oh, you snuck it up on me.
Woo! He's in one episode. He doesn't even get a name.
Really?
What a fucking flex to cast Shea Wiggum for one episode of your show where he doesn't even get a name. He just has a long monologue and then even longer dialogue with Boyd Crowder.
Oh, neat. That's cool.
Really fun. You got to watch that show. Enough is enough. Was there anything else from this section we missed, or should we move on to Act 2?
I think we're ready to move on.
All right. Gemini 8 launches with Neil in command, and it's initially a great success as Neil uses his skills and determination to locate and dock with the unmanned Agena spacecraft. But things quickly go bad when their ship begins spinning uncontrollably. Meanwhile, back at home, in Neil's frequent absence, Janet has been struggling to deal with their 2 young boys. Now, as things start to go bad in space, NASA shuts off Janet's live feed of the mission radio. Refusing to be cut off from her husband's fate, Janet drives down to mission control and angrily tells operations director Deke Slayton he had better turn the feed back on. Up in space with only moments to spare before being knocked unconscious by the rotational G-force, Neil regains control of the Gemini capsule and the mission makes an early but safe return to Earth. Things continue to get more serious as the Gemini missions wrap up, and Neil is chosen as one of the astronauts to continue on in the Apollo program. At one point, Neil is sent to Washington, D.C. to do some PR for NASA. The space program is facing political pressure over their huge budget and questionable successes. At a White House event, Neil is frustrated because he's terrible at schmoozing, but he gets help from his colleague, Jim Lovell, played by Pablo Schreiber. Then Neil gets more bad news. His colleagues Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee have died. The crew of Apollo 1 burned up in a shocking accident in what should have been a routine pre-flight test of the capsule. This is yet another brush with death that leaves Neil more withdrawn, but even more determined to succeed at the mission.
The guy deals with a lot of stuff. Like, you feel for him. And his wife even comments on back when we were at Edwards Air Force Base doing test pilot shit. There was one year where we lost 4 pilots. It's just the way of the world for people in this world to face a lot of deaths, but they really stack up on Neil Armstrong during the course of this movie.
Yeah, it's a really horrific scene, the test in the Apollo 1 capsule, because they start off very jovial, but there's always a hint that something is going wrong. There's problems with the radio cutting in and out. And then when the fire starts, even then they're not quite panicking immediately. They're just like, oh, we got a fire. And then like it keeps going. And then when this, like, the loss of oxygen causes it to implode on itself. You compared in your notes the Gemini 8 to a horror movie. That whole scene in Apollo 1 is a horror movie to me.
Yeah, Chazelle leans hard into how scary all this stuff is. I mean, we talked about how the X-15, the space launches are terrifying in an aggressive way. And this one is in a way that kind of something evil is sneaking up on you. Because I think everybody knows. I don't know if you remember that episode in history, but I kind of knew that was coming up. And then I go, oh shit, this is the scene.
The Apollo 1 test?
Yeah.
No, I had no idea that this was part of history.
Yeah, somehow I knew that as a kid. Like, it was still recent history when I was a kid. Like, my parents had a phonograph record that was like the Apollo 11 official double album of just like recordings of the mission radio. And it had all this, it was just really cool stuff inside, illustrations and photos and things. But it was
rad.
You know, it was obviously huge in public consciousness. But I think that the Apollo 1, I think there's recordings of that too. So I suspect that the dialogue in that scene might have been pulled from real life, like including the part where the fire starts. I'm not sure if they went strictly word for word on it, but I bet that a lot of it's really close.
I bet Chazelle, wanted to keep it as true to life as possible.
And like Ryan Gosling pretty much does word for word when Neil Armstrong's walking on the moon, because we're all familiar with those things he said. Yeah, that scene is rough. And it's your guy, Shea Wiggum, who's being gruff and mouthing off and being like, you guys suck. You can't even make our radios work. And then in moments, he's gone. Yeah.
Not to take anything away from the Gemini 8 sequence either, though, because that's another harrowing situation. And just one of the things I loved in this scene, though, is he's up there with, is he up there with Lucas Haas?
He's up there with the other guy that kind of looks like Lucas Haas.
Christopher Abbott. That would have been John Bernthal in another world up there with, where he's trying to talk to him and he's like, just shut up. I got to figure this out. And you see him like literally doing longhand math, just trying to like figure out what's going wrong.
Right. That's a cool example of how a movie can portray the drama of a very technical moment in history, but it really comes across. And I don't know how close that he was to the way it actually went down, but he's like, shut up. Houston is also like telling him, we're working on a new vector for how to line you up with the Agena so you can dock. And he's like, I'm doing this math myself. And he's got his little pad and he's scribbling and he's like, okay, I'm going to do a burn that's X and Y and Z. And it's cool. It gives you that moment of, oh, this guy's really competent and capable. And that's him doing his shit.
So then when we start spinning uncontrollably, the fear is that they pass out and then what, just die because they never wake up because it just keeps spinning?
I guess so. That's the one part where I felt like the movie went a little too Hollywood. And this is just me, my suspicions. Because the truth is that did happen and it took them a while to notice. But the thing is, if you don't notice that you're spinning...
What's the danger?
Yeah, like eventually they found out there was one thruster that just didn't totally shut off. But it was spinning them very slowly. But the thing is, in space, it continues to accelerate you. And eventually you're going fast. And it's a real problem, but it's kind of a dry problem up until the point where you're really passing out. now. But for some reason, it turned from, oh, we just barely noticed that something is slowly making a spin and this is going to eventually add up to a problem, to as soon as they noticed it, then the ship began shaking and roaring and
it went 0 to 100.
and like uncontrollably tearing itself apart. And you're like, actually, it would probably be totally silent and unnoticeable, except for the feeling of G-force, which you can't really put on camera. So I get it. They Hollywoodized that a little bit to accentuate the drama of the threat to these guys.
The real danger is happening back in Houston as Janet Armstrong is having a hell of a time with her 2 living children. You called this scene out as just being very like realistic. And as a father, I have to agree. I've had the conversation she's having with these kids so many times, but I had all my stuff out on my desk and he threw it. And now I'm just like, yeah, man, that sucks. I've been there.
Yeah, it's really real. The kids are really good. The writing is excellent. And I'm not a father, but like I've seen enough of the way kids are at that age. Each one of like the younger one is kind of like too young to be thoughtful. He's the emotional creature. He's more lighthearted and silly. And then when he steals the radio, like, and playfully threatens to take it away from his mom while she's trying to listen to whether her husband's going to survive. And she's like, I'm not joking. I'll give that back. And like that tension of him totally not getting it, just grinning like an idiot while she's like freaking out, but trying not to freak out on him is like an incredible depiction of parent-child relationship there. And then the older kid is more thoughtful and like him trying to keep cool, trying to explain his frustration with the way his brother messed up the things that he had all perfect the way he wanted them, and her trying to encourage him to stay cool, but then he loses it and he lashes out at his mom for a minute. It just all felt so real. I'm like, man, the family drama in this is really good.
They also cast some good 1950s kids. Those kids really look like they were pulled right out of the 50s and 60s.
They totally did.
The younger one reminded me of Finkus. Was it Finkus from A Christmas Story?
Oh,
the kid with like the little raccoon hat.
Okay.
That jumps out and throws snowballs at him. He had that kind of face. I don't know why.
He was good.
Yeah. No, both kids are great. And you can start to see, though, in their older son, and I'm sorry I don't have the names of the kids.
I never caught their names either.
I know one of them's Rick and one of them's Mark, but I don't know which is which. But like he's starting to have some Neil-like tendencies as well of repression, which comes up more in the third act. So maybe we'll get into it more then. But
yes, we should definitely come back to that.
He's clearly being impacted by his father's demeanor, and neglect might be too strong a word, but the distance he keeps between himself and his kids emotionally.
Yeah, that comes through. And again, with very little, because the main story is a lot of training and flying spaceships, but they managed to pack a lot into the family side.
And we do get Neil and Jim Lovell at the White House, which I found to be pretty unrealistic because politicians are concerned about spending taxpayer money. What's this about? That's not how things usually go.
That was the senator's complaint to Neil that he had a hard time justifying. But I guess to make it more realistic, you can assume that the senator wanted to spend that taxpayers' money on his pork barrel issues for his district, and Houston wasn't his thing. So he was just pissed about not getting the money himself.
Yeah, or he probably wanted a new helicopter or a fur coat for his mistress. I'm sorry, I'm applying modern logic to this movie, which takes place a long time ago. That's my mistake.
Yeah, it's another good scene. That's a place where I thought, oh, maybe they might be foreshortening some of the historical realism to put Neil in the White House, stumbling with his inability to be a good communicator and warm and social. At the same time, he's learning about more of his friends dying because he gets called out of that very room to find out about the Apollo 1 tragedy. So it's all packed into a tight space, but it communicates a lot.
I did like that. That was one of 2 scenes where we get a sense of how the world is reacting to these expenditures, that maybe there is some not altogether unreasonable concern that there are issues at home we could be spending this money on. Why are we going to the moon?
It's still a good question, and I'm sure it was like more poignant at that time. And like we seem to be swept up in this thing that we must have invested scads of money in it. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if a rat bit your sister and you can't pay the doctor bills, do you really care if we're going to the moon?
No.
I'm not quoting Gil Scott-Heron, but we'll get back to that.
Okay.
Are you ready for the third act?
Yeah, let's land this thing on the moon.
Oh boy, that's a lot of pressure.
Against the backdrop of growing public doubt in the space program, Neil Armstrong stoically continues on. While training for the landing, Neil crashes the lunar lander research vehicle, escaping only thanks to his ejection seat and a parachute. Returning home after the incident, Neil shuts out Janet when she asks about the bloody gash on his forehead. Soon, Deke Slayton informs Neil that he's been chosen to command Apollo 11, the mission most likely to be the first to land on the moon. As Apollo 11 commander, Neil still sucks at giving a press conference, but his annoying co-pilot Buzz Aldrin, played by Corey Stoll, steps in to answer reporters' questions. Later, as Neil packs to leave home for the big mission, Janet confronts him, telling Neil she refuses to be the one who has to tell her children that their father might not come home. She rejects Neil's weak excuses and forces him to talk to his 2 boys before he leaves the house. Thanks to Janet, they get to see their dad off with a proper goodbye. With a steely and nearly wordless resolve, Armstrong guides Apollo through a tense but successful launch. 4 days later, as the landing module descends to the moon's surface, they realize they've overshot their intended spot and are heading for a big crater. With only seconds of booster fuel left, Neil steers the craft to a safe landing. And as he makes the moonwalk that completes the triumphant mission, Neil takes a moment to reflect and say a final goodbye to his baby daughter. Once back on Earth, Janet comes to visit Neil while he's in his mandatory quarantine. Despite the personal closure that Neil may have found in completing his mission, a distance remains between Neil and Janet.
Literal barrier between them.
The symbolism is strong in this movie. There's a glass barrier between Neil and Janet. There is a concretized icon of his baby daughter, Karen, that he carries with him to the moon to symbolically say goodbye in a visual way, so you didn't just have to look at his face and imagine what he was thinking.
Yeah, they're both very expressive face actors as well, so you can get a real sense of which way they're going with it without needing dialogue between them, which is great because Neil Armstrong doesn't talk a lot. But you mentioned early in this section the backdrop of growing public doubt, and I think that is why the Whitey's on the moon sequence is important. And I read reviews from the typical like dickheads that were critical of this inclusion, but for one thing, I'm a big Leon Bridges fan, so love seeing him take on the role of Gil Scott-Heron. He's a great neo-soul singer, if you haven't checked him out.
Yeah, that was a good casting.
And then just the poem is excellent, Whitey's on the Moon. It's a very famous piece of writing that while we're not as concerned with going to the moon, unless you're fucking Elon, looking at the way our country spends money and prioritizes spending, the message still resonates today.
I would say it resonates more than ever because at that time it was super powerful message. And I agree, it feels a little Hollywood cheesy to throw that in there, a musical montage, but hardly anybody ever said it better than Gil Scott-Heron. It's summing up this shocking disparity between how money's being spent and how people are living. And in his time, it particularly affected the African-American community, marginalized communities. And today, unfortunately, it's gotten worse for everyone. More than ever, people are asking questions.
And more than ever, not getting answers.
That's true.
Or at least not honest, helpful ones. All right. So let's talk a little bit. Everyone knew as soon as we met Buzz Aldrin that he was going to the moon, but I was still not prepared for how much I just wanted to slap the shit out of him in every scene he's in. And during this press conference, the juxtaposition between, did him and Neil Armstrong ever like hang out after the moon? I gather no. My money's on absolutely not.
It seems like they really just rubbed each other the wrong way. Buzz is illustrated in this, rubbing everybody the wrong way. He's always saying the impolite thing, and he says it. He's that guy. He goes, I'm just saying what everybody's thinking. Goes, shut up. Keep it to yourself.
Fucking hate that person. Yeah. He is the closest this movie will give us to an antagonist, except for like Grief.
Grief, and then Russians, and then senators. But this is a guy who actually, it's interesting because it's real, and like he gets in Neil's face. He goes about his job the exact opposite way, goes about his job in his life, saying exactly what's on his mind, which is the opposite of what Neil does. And yet they got to work together. They're in this little capsule and they got to land on the fucking moon together. And they're both pros. And that's what's nice about it, is like, it's not overdone. And even in that scene where like Buzz has to step in because Neil is stumbling over reporters' questions and just doesn't like to answer their questions. And Buzz is like, I think I can shed some light on this. He actually does a great job. And he gives a good answer. He's not being a jerk to the press. He says something that's actually relatable and cute and charming. So he's capable in his job, and he's not just a one-dimensional villain.
That makes him look like more of an asshole, though, because this whole like, I just say whatever's on my mind thing is clearly not true, because you can finesse your public persona enough to not come off as a dickhead. So
that's true. If he cared, he could say the right thing.
He just does not give a fuck. Yeah, every time somebody dies, it's like they have to have Buzz Aldrin there to say something insensitive about them. Like, oh, clearly they didn't calculate correctly. I was just like, oh, I would have fucking hit him with a hammer at some point. Speaking of wanting to hit people, Janet finally fucking loses her shit on Neil. And rightfully so. You were right to point out that like he's in mega sulky dad mode in this act. He is shut down. He is completely just a robot man.
And they show him pushing everybody away. He's pushing his colleagues away, the press, his kids, his wife. And thank goodness for, we don't know how true this portrayal of Janet Armstrong is, but Claire Foy's work here is great. And it's a really powerful moment for the movie when she says, I've had enough, because she has to really push him.
Yeah.
She goes after him harder and harder, and he's trying to dodge. He's like going into the next room and packing his briefcase.
Oh, the kids are asleep. And she's like, no, they're not. Like, what a stupid thing to lie about. It's so easily disprovable.
Yeah. He's like, it's too late. I can't talk to them. They're asleep. She's like, they're not asleep, and you know that. So she really calls him on his shit. It's really great. And then like we talked about the kids, they show that whole painful scene where they're sitting around the dining room table having the conversation that she forced Neil to have with them. And he's still being a shut down nerd and like, okay, does anyone have any further questions? Like he's trying trying to wrap it up.
I wanted to slap the shit out of him when his son comes around and shakes his hand. I wanted to slap Ryan Gosling in the fucking face. Like, hug your son, you monster.
That's such a good moment because the little one, the emotionally open one, just runs up and hugs him after they wrap the conversation. And then, like you said, the older boy has already absorbed his lessons of his dad, and he's really struggling with this, and you see it on his face. And then he comes around and he offers out his hand to shake, and Neil shakes his hand like a real 50s dad. And that was just really, it was really powerful because it was like, it felt really real to me. I had a dad who was not emotionally open, and so it was like, oh man, that got to me.
Yeah, I dealt with some of that growing up too, but it just makes me want to hug my kid when he like brings me a paperclip. I'm like,
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I love it. Here is a long hug for you because
Thank God time has moved on and men like you have evolved.
I'm emotional to a fault. I love big.
It's a good way to be. Don't tamp that down and become a Neil Armstrong.
It's a little late for that. I feel like I'm the same age Neil was in this movie.
Yeah,
And then we get to the moon, and that's the moon, all right. It really looked like the moon.
it really does.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive.
And again, mostly not CGI, mostly like a real quarry that they like staged to look like the moon.
Yeah, pretty. I would love to see those behind the scenes features that Apple TV has, but alas, I do not have Apple TV. I'd be curious how they did it.
Yeah, actually, I didn't get to see a lot of that part. I saw a lot of that rig with the capsules and the giant screen, but the moon just, for a movie that you know is leading up for 2 hours to the moon, you got to sort of do the moon right or people are going to feel cheated. And I feel like he really did. Like when you're on there, like he just lets you soak in the moon, which is obviously what the character's doing too. He's, oh man, I put so much of my pain and my life into this. And so you get these moments where you're just standing there looking at the moon and it's like, this is kind of nice. It's a nice payoff for everything we all went through.
And him burying Karen's bracelet on the moon is another peek into his mind and his emotional state. Like he still carries her with him. He's still obviously very much in pain and turmoil after her death. And it's been at least 5 years, right? Since that all went down by this point.
At least, man, that timeline is compressed. I was going to say 10 years, but you're right. It's probably not that much, but
Yeah, because
it's been a while.
the son was the older son was around when Karen was around, and he's not 10 yet. I think he looks like 8 or 9.
Yeah, could be about 5 or 6 years.
And that was a nice payoff to her story because she's like a specter that hangs over the movie and comes up occasionally, usually with Janet being like, does Neil ever talk to you about Karen? And everyone's like, who? This is the most repressed man in the world, does not even discuss that with us.
He brings it up one time to his buddy Ed while they're out on a walk, and it immediately kills the mood and ends the walk. He's, hey, I just thought of my late daughter, Karen, and now I'm going home. That's ruined our night.
I have to sit quietly in a chair and not doing anything for a while now.
He's good at that, and he's good at staring at the moon. The other like pervasive theme throughout this movie is the camera keeps looking up at the moon, and Neil's looking at it, and he's got various devices that he's like peering at the moon through, and he's always like, there's the moon again. It's fucking with me. It's haunting me.
There should just be one scene where he's like looking through a telescope, but also giving it the finger with his other hand.
He's giving it the finger, and you get the impression that the moon is giving him the finger right back.
I hope you can see this because I'm doing it as hard as I can.
That was one thing about, so Buzz Aldrin did a little guest spot on 30 Rock years ago. I don't know if you remember.
I know, I forgot that.
But he was always yelling at the moon. And like when the moon was out during the day, be like, go back to the night. I walked on your face, you stupid idiot.
That's awesome.
Typical 30 Rock. Great joke. And then we already spoiled the real life resolution of Janet and Neil's relationship. They did eventually separate. Neil remarried and he makes a little effort. He blows her a kiss. She kind of doesn't reciprocate. She's probably still mad at him.
It's another powerful scene. I don't think anyone says a word in that scene. It's like it's 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, once Deke lets her in the room, it's no dialogue.
It's just them looking at each other, slowly approaching, facial expressions. Like you give him some credit because he is the first one to make a move. They're sort of confronting each other and he blows her that little kiss and she reciprocates, but you're not sure she's going to for a minute because it takes her a second and she doesn't put her fingers to her lips or anything. She just puts her hand up against his hand on the glass. So it's tentative and without saying anything, they communicated quite a bit about the state of their relationship.
Yeah, and that's First Man.
Yeah.
We made it. Neil actually, he did leave NASA. He stated he did not want to go to space again after Apollo 11, but he did join a commission to investigate what went wrong with Apollo 13. So he was still involved with NASA. They would commission him occasionally and do some contract work. He taught mostly following his time at NASA.
That's the thing I guess that's part of the unspoken great irony of this is they got through it. His career, him giving everything to his career and what that took away from his family was what broke him and came between him and his wife. And at this moment, it was over, right? He had been to the moon. He's back. He's like, okay, I can put that behind me. And theoretically, quickly go back to being a husband and a father, but like it was kind of too late. It was this sad irony that it was all spoiled.
Do you want to hear a little bit about what the people involved in this movie have been up to since?
Yeah, I hope their lives weren't sadly ruined by this.
I would say no one's life was ruined by this movie, as far as I could tell. Let's talk about Damien Chazelle. He debuted in 2009 with a low-budget indie musical. Fucking guy loves musicals. It was called Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench. It was well-received critically, and I did not realize that he stayed busy writing screenplays. He wrote The Last Exorcism Part 2 and Grand Piano in 2013.
Interesting.
And then he wrote and directed his breakout Whiplash in 2014, which you hate, and my friends Matt and Craig refused to watch because they hate me. And it was both critically and commercially lauded because it rules. Made $50 million on a $3 million budget.
Can't argue with success.
And I would just like to take this moment now. What do you have to say for yourself?
I have to say that I love you and your buddies love you, and we just don't. I didn't hate Whiplash. I just had issues with it.
Your issue is that it made like drumming look like torture?
Yeah, I was a drummer initially. So like on a musical, I get it again. It's like you got to Hollywoodize these things. And I think did Chazelle go to music school or something? He had some personal experience that he said he drew from for that movie. But it felt like a very cheapened up version of like jazz is when you drum as hard and fast as you can until you bleed. And then you've achieved jazz. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like what I understand about music. So that was a little hard to swallow.
It is funny to take so seriously the form of music that's like skibbity bip bop.
Exactly.
So you got to die for this shit. It's a bit much, but no, you're right. He had a drum teacher. He was a jazz drummer at Princeton High School, and his music teacher was very intense and was the inspiration for the J.K. Simmons character in Whiplash.
Yeah, what can I say? He drew from his own experience. He made a pretty good movie. I loved how evil the J.K. character turned out to be, and a twist that really stuck with me about that movie. So I don't hate everything about it. And
I'm no Miles Teller fan, but he's perfect for that movie because he has to be a smarmy dickhead for most of it, pushing everyone in his life away so he can focus on the drums. And he played that role really well.
Yeah.
Smarmy dickhead. No comment on why he was so good at that. I have no further knowledge. In 2016, Chazelle co-wrote the very underrated 10 Cloverfield Lane, a movie I'm quite fond of.
Yes.
Excellent John Goodman performance in that. And then he wrote and directed La La Land. That won him his Best Director Oscar, won Emma Stone her first Best Actress Oscar. It also, like I mentioned, briefly won Best Picture, of course. If you remember, that was the Moonlight Oscars.
Yes.
After First Man, he released Babylon in 2022, a huge bomb that he both wrote and directed, starring Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie. It lost nearly $90 million. I'm sure we'll cover it at some point. And currently he's got a mysterious movie, not like a mystery, but a movie that we don't know much about. It could be a mystery. I don't know. Starring Cillian Murphy, Daniel Craig, and Dave Bautista.
That's an interesting cast.
Craig and Bautista worked together on Spectre already, James Bond.
I've forgotten that.
Yeah, Bautista played like a henchman. I don't think he had a huge role.
Oh, okay.
But he was already in his actor mold, so he probably has some lines in it. They didn't just make him a silent killer.
Yeah, that's fun. I look forward to finding out what that movie's about.
Me too. It doesn't even have a name as far as I could tell right now.
Oh, okay.
Josh Singer, who rewrote the script after the Clint Eastwood dropped out situation, he got his start as a TV writer. He wrote on The West Wing and then moved over to film with 2013's The Fifth Estate, which was the Julian Assange biopic with Benedict Cumberbatch. And then he co-wrote 2015's Spotlight, which won him an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay.
Impressive.
And then he wrote The Post in 2017 before First Man, and then followed up with 2023's Maestro.
Wow.
Which was the Bradley Cooper.
I didn't realize Josh Singer really has credentials when it comes to like pretentious
biopic shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Serious Hollywood movies. That's cool.
I never saw The Fifth Estate. I don't think it was super well received, but everything else he's written has been absolutely loved by critics.
That's that shit that they eat up.
He's next writing a Bullet reboot, though, so that seems like a real turn from his prestige work.
Interesting.
All right, let's talk about The Goose. We're going to focus on his recent activities because we did The Nice Guys not too long ago, and he didn't do anything between 2018 and 2022. So he wowed the world as Ken in Barbie. Then he starred with Emily Blunt in the fun and entertaining Fall Guy, which unfortunately was a bomb, so we could talk about that if we want.
I'm looking forward to talking about that. I loved that movie, and I loved him in it.
It is really just a rollicking good time. And then Project Hail Mary is out now, doing really well at the box office, getting fantastic reviews. And then Star Wars Starfighter, which I think is Sean Levy, which doesn't fill me with a ton of optimism about that movie's critical prospects. Let me just make sure I'm correct. I am correct. Sean Levy, who directed just a bunch of bullshit. Jesus Christ. Night at the Museum, 1 and 2 and 3. Real Steel.
Ooh.
Free Guy.
Gets worse.
Yeah. Deadpool and Wolverine.
Oh, okay.
Which he also wrote. I don't know how much writing goes into those movies, though. I feel like Ryan Reynolds just ad-libs.
He just set him loose.
And now Star Wars starfighters. So yeah, I'd probably be more excited about that movie with a different director attached, but I will withhold judgment until I have a chance to check it out.
Hoping for the best.
Claire Foy. There's really only 2 leads in this movie, so I only wanted to talk about Claire Foy and Ryan Gosling.
Okay, sure.
But Claire Foy made her name on British TV series like Upstairs, Downstairs, and then moved into films in 2011's Season of the Witch, which was a very terrible Nicolas Cage sci-fi fantasy horror thing. And the movie Wreckers she was in as well back then. In 2018, she worked with Steven Soderbergh in Unsane, which is great. And that will tie into next week's movie. Still probably best known for playing Queen Elizabeth II on The Crown, though she's also appeared in shows like Wolf Hall, Mog's Christmas, and the upcoming Marlowe. These are the most fucking British-ass names for television shows I've ever heard. I love it. And she's also done some other movie work like Women Talking, All of Us Strangers, and H is for Hawk. And she's got some stuff on the horizon. She's next going to star in the Peter Glan's comedy Savage House, fantasy musical The Magical Faraway Tree, and Danny Boyle's Ink. So she's going to be working with Danny Boyle.
Oh, interesting.
Like to see that. I wasn't super familiar with her before this, but big fan now. She gives a great performance.
Same here. Like, I guess I knew she was in The Crown before this, but her face came on screen. I'm like, oh, this is somebody I don't know. And by the end of the movie, I'm like, oh, she really won me over.
Yeah, she's electric as Janet Armstrong. Or maybe that's just in comparison to Neil Armstrong. It took a lot.
Yeah, she probably had to tone it down just to not blow Neil Armstrong off the screen.
So I mentioned that Unsane was a hint for next week's movie. And we just recently talked about this. So I hope you remember what next week's movie is.
Well, you know how you tell me about a movie that we're doing and immediately I put it out of mind, but not this one.
No, this one you put out of sight.
Oh.
One of my 5 favorite movies of all time from my favorite director. My favorite movie from my favorite director.
Nice.
So this is going to be a special one. Out of Sight, the George Clooney, Jennifer Lopez crime romance comedy.
A little bit of everything.
You got Steve Zahn. You got Ving Rhames. You got Don Cheadle. You got a really good performance by Isaiah Washington. And they're adapting Elmore Leonard, and Steven Soderbergh's directing it. What more could you ask for?
It's a pretty killer lineup. I remember loving this movie when it came out, when I didn't know anything about almost everybody involved, except maybe Jennifer Lopez. And it just hit me, really made an impression on me. And I don't know that maybe I saw it once since the first time, but I'm really looking forward to going back to it.
I would argue it's probably better than you remember, but I also saw this movie in the theater at the tender age of 10 or 11.
Oh, wow.
Which is not
one of those.
Not appropriate, but my grandmother was a big Elmore Leonard fan.
Oh,
and I
cool.
think I was staying with her. So she was like, we're going to the movies. And I just was immediately hooked. Maybe my favorite Don Cheadle performance as well. He's really good.
Nice.
We were just reading this fundamentalist shit. Got a little excited. It's got some of the best line deliveries of all time in that movie.
Nice.
He doesn't have to die. He could fall down, hurt himself on something real hard, like a shiv or my dick.
Yes, it's coming back to me now. I actually can picture him saying that.
All right. And so thank you guys so much for listening. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the pod on your platform of choice. It helps people discover us. It makes us more visible. We like being visible most of the time.
Love a little bit of visibility here and there.
You can follow us on Twitter or Blue Sky, Blast Zone Pod on both. Email us, blastzonepod@gmail.com. If you have any questions, movie suggestions, or just want to chat with us about movies, we love hearing from you.
We do.
And we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
That one wasn't weird.